But yeah, thank you so much, Glenn, and thank you so much to the band and Brian Harris for your direction of this band. It's just so amazing. So yes, times like these. I requested that song knowing that Glenn could do some rock, and I just find it to be so relevant. Times like these. I was actually doing some reading about when the Foo Fighters were writing this song. So Dave Grohl is the former drummer of Nirvana, for all y'all that don't know. And this song was written between the first and second album. And, you know, they had been touring with this other band called Queens of the Stone Age and, you know, started gaining some notoriety. And so they came back together to record the second album, and they were just not feeling it. Like, they were struggling. As, you know, we all hear about this band drama that can happen. And this is exactly what was going down. One of the members of the band had really just gotten into the party scene, had overdosed and almost died from drugs. The creativity just wasn't flowing, and you know, David Grohl just talked about how like he somehow just didn't feel like himself during this time, and they had to navigate all of these changes, this newfound fame. One of the members of the band, Chris Shirley, said, you know, we were just trying to figure out how to be a band still. We were trying to figure it out. We were making this record, and it just wasn't really happening. The recordings weren't what they wanted them to be. The enthusiasm wasn't there. I actually thought the band was going to break up. We all got in a huge argument, and it was maybe the closest the band ever really did come to breaking up, but then somehow we didn't. And I love this. I love that, like, it was in the midst of all of this turmoil, all of this unknown, right, that they ended up recording one of their most famous songs yet to this date, maybe their most famous song yet. And I gotta say, like, oh, that's hitting me right now, right? I think there's a part of me that just wants to bail. Like, can we just like take just a piece out for a little bit? Can we just take a break for a second with all of the things that are happening in the world? And it feels like we're on mile whatever, like 20 of the 26-mile marathon right now. It feels like a lot, and big part of me is just like, yeah, call me when all this is over, right? Just like, you know where I am. But I love this idea that like, we sacrifice something when we do that. And I notice the tendency in myself that I have to do that. Like, when things get hard, I tend to just be like, yeah, deuces, I'm out. But I find that there's something lost there when I want to run. I find that something gets sacrificed, and like a lot of magic can be lost when I try to do that. And I love like sort of the story of this song, that it came in the midst of this time when probably everybody in the band wanted to bail, but they didn't, right? There was like some deeper commitment to the magic of them being together, to the music itself, to the creative process. Let's be real, like, this time is also one in which a lot of creativity is happening kind of by necessity. And even though it's difficult, it's been so rich in its own way. And I guess my invitation as we enter into this today is to like notice if that tendency to want to bail, whether that's bailing on a person or a place, whatever that is for you, whether however you want to run away right now, just like notice how that's coming up, and see like what gifts there could be just by slowing down and taking a breath. And notice like how, to me, like this is what keeping the faith is all about, right? It's recognizing that there's always something deeper going on in the midst of any challenge. And that like if we give ourselves to it for long enough and from a place that's real enough and genuine enough within us, like there's going to be gifts there. Like we will benefit from that. And that to me is what keeping faith is all about. I feel like it just roots me into something deeper that allows me to stay anchored in the midst of all of these crazy flowing waters that we're navigating right now. Here at New Thought, we have this amazing, comforting, to some pretty radical idea of this thing that many people have called God, the universe, this energy, this life force, this ineffable presence that human beings over time have tried to explain, tried to come in contact with. We all kind of, I think, have a sense of what I'm talking about. We have this deep belief here, and some would maybe even call us sacrilegious for believing this, that it's not just outside, it's not just transcendent, right? That it's deeply immanent. It's right here. It's closer than our breath. It's not that, some dude in the sky that's bearded and somehow ripped also in like the Sistine Chapel version, which, all due respect to Michelangelo, work of art. I've seen the Sistine Chapel, is truly stunning. But we have a little bit of a different view of the divine here that is seen as this place within us, right? So when we are singing that song, I Give Myself, it's not like giving ourselves, when we say we are giving ourselves to God, it's not like any power outside of us. We're giving ourselves to this place within us that is so deeply connected to who we are and who, our most authentic self, that is so deeply connected to this place within us that can be a place of peace in the midst of turmoil, right? This place within us that can actually steady us, right? So what's real about that too, we say new thought, ancient wisdom here a lot. This is nothing new, by the way, y'all. This has been, this idea of God as immanent and transcendent has been around for a really long time throughout many different faith traditions. So the 13th century Persian poet, Jalal ad-Din Muhammad Rumi, often just known as Rumi, Rumi said it this way. Rumi said, "I searched for God and found only myself. I searched for myself and found only God." And Saint Elizabeth of the Trinity, who comes out of the Christian tradition, she was a nun in the Carmelite order in France in the late 1800s. She said, "It seems to me that I have found my heaven on earth because heaven is you, my God, and you are in my soul. You in me and I in you. Let this be my motto." And out of the Hindu tradition, Sri Ramakrishna Paramahansa said it this way. He said, "So long as God seems to be outside and far away, there is ignorance. But when God is realized within, that is true knowledge." Right? So when we kind of take God as this immanent aspect of our being that is right here, I find that just subtle shift can bring me this place of centeredness, of being tethered to something, this power that is the same power that, allows me to stand in awe of the stars when you can see them here in Portland. The same energy that is moving through this beautiful mist that is falling right now. The same energy that gives life to that brand new seed that grows into these 200, 300-foot trees. This ineffable, awe-inspiring force that lives in all things, but also right here, we are not separate from that. We are so deeply a part of that. And it makes me realize too, these folks who I just quoted, they lived through some hard times, right? Let's be real, we're living through some challenging times right now, but these folks I just quoted, they also lived through some crazy hard times. So did y'all know that Rumi was a refugee? So Rumi, when he was a teenager, had lived in this village that was right near the border of Afghanistan in present-day Turkmenistan. And it was in the 13th century, it was when the Mongol Empire was doing their thing in the world. And they fled, right? And they were refugees for years. Like his whole upbringing, he didn't have a home. And it wasn't until like 4 or 5 years later that they finally settled. And Saint Elizabeth, that saint that said, I and you and me, she had a tough go at it too. Like she had this disease called Addison's disease, which is this disease that affects your adrenal glands. And it's supposed to be just incredibly painful in nature. And she ended up dying very young. She died at age 26. And yet, she has some of the most beautiful poetry about this deep oneness with the divine. I really encourage you all to check her stuff out. And Ramakrishna, let's be real about Ramakrishna. He was living in India during the time of the British Raj, right? During a time in which his religion was largely being oppressed, right? He faced tremendous oppression, and so much of his life was to revive Hinduism and to be a proponent for Indian independence, right? And he never actually got to see that, but there was a huge part of what he was about, and a huge part of his devotion to wanting that indigenous religion of India to live on, right? And so it kind of makes sense that these mystics, they found their way to the divine on their own. They didn't need an intercessor. They didn't necessarily even need a building. It was just right here. Because maybe, for Rumi, that temple, that mosque wasn't that he grew up in, like he could never go back to. He was never able to go back to his home, right? Saint Elizabeth, she could have done the thing of like, why? She could have just thrown her fist up at the divine, because she experienced a very difficult health challenges very early on in life, right? And Ramakrishna could have chose to fight or to show up in his life in a way that made him bitter and angry and resentful. But they all instead found this way to connect to the divine within themselves that not only helped them navigate those challenges, but I think steadied them in this way. It allowed them to live through those challenges with ease and with grace and with joy, right? There's this passage from the book of Hebrews that I've always loved. It goes like this: we who come to God for refuge might be encouraged to seize the hope that is set before us. That hope is real and true, an anchor to steady our restless souls, a hope that leads us back behind the curtain to where God is. There is so much beautiful poetry in the Bible, if you allow it to be kind of seen that way, right? I love this idea of being a steadying presence for our restless souls. We just adopted a little dog, a rescue dog. He's anywhere from 6 to 9 years old. And like all rescue dogs, he came to us with some stuff. He is a very anxious little guy, right? He's very anxious. And so we've been trying to teach him commands. And I realized one of the best things that my wife and Rebecca and I can do for this little guy is just to be a calm, steadying presence, right? It's weird. Dogs, they just kind of reflect you. If you're crazy, anxious, and energy, they're all right, this is what we're doing. I'm going to be crazy and anxious and energetic. I'm down. If you're calm and you're this is what we're doing now, bud. He's all right, it's really hard, but all right, we're going to do it. And sometimes he gets so anxious, he just shakes. He's this is what we're doing, and it's really hard. But I'm going to do it. And I realized it is just such a beautiful spiritual practice for me right now. And I've been using this command, settle down, just settle. And so my wife, the other day, she does this sometimes, but instead of using the word settle, for whatever reason, she started using the word steady. Steady, steady. And I noticed it had this whole different energy to it. And so we're using that command now, and I'm starting to use it with myself. And I invite all of us to use this. We are trainable as well, y'all. Dogs are pretty smart, but we're pretty smart too. Like, we can do this. And I want to invite us all into this practice. Like, part of keeping faith for me right now is just to steady. Just to steady. And as the world continues to swirl, we're not being asked to turn away from it, actually far from it. I think there's also a calling within us to meet these challenges. But let's be real, we have to do so in a way that is grounded, that is connected to a power within us that can sustain us, that can allow our hearts to lead the way, that can allow our minds to take cues from that, to be in this place where it doesn't matter what's going on. It doesn't matter if we're just shaking inside. Like, there's something within us that actually wants us to steady. That wants us just to be here for it all. So what I also notice, right, about this practice is it helps me to keep hope alive in all the things that are going on in the world, right? Dr. Martin Luther King, he said, "We must accept finite disappointment, but never lose infinite hope," right? We were talking about this in my heart-centered social justice class. We were talking about how, part of this work is pretty depressing. Part of this work is really hard. Because what it asks us to do is to face all of these things that are happening in the world that we know in our hearts are not okay, that are unjust, that we know like a better way is possible, that we have people in our life that have been impacted by these things, right? And it's hard to face all of those things sometimes, but there's something within us that wants to. There's something within us that allows us to never lose hope, right? In the midst of what can feel like disappointment. Because let's be real, if you start, kind of doing organizing and activism or social justice or just seeking change in any way, whether that's in yourself or in the world, you're going to be disappointed at some point. You're going to take a couple steps forward, and you might take a couple steps back and feel like you're in the same place that you started. However, this is not the nature of life, right? Life is iterative. Life builds on itself. So as we grow and evolve, whether that's personally or as a society, we have to remember that if it feels like we're coming back to something that we've been at before, we're just at another part of that spiral that we're coming back up. Right? And we're here just to learn a little bit more. And so for me, right, keeping faith is just about continuing just to breathe, accepting the disappointment, but never losing hope, right? And I love what Reverend Shannon said last week. I love that in the fall we get to talk about new beginnings. It always happens in the spring, but I'm also a fall baby. Actually, Shannon and I's birthday are just a day apart. Surprise, surprise. September 28th and 29th. So this is always my new year. This is always my new beginning. This is when I'm always setting intentions for what's next. And I love what Reverend Shannon said about new beginnings. She said, in every breath, we have a choice to begin again. That is grace. In every breath, we have the choice to begin again. That is grace. Grace can be this new beginning. And I'm noticing, right, that I am needing a little bit of grace right now, too. Can anyone else feel me in that? Are you all feeling that, too? I'm not showing up as my best self all the time. And that's hard to admit, but I'll be the first to admit it. And I think what I notice that is when I'm grounded to this presence within, I can offer that to myself, and I can offer that to others much more easily, right? I'm not on this defensive mode. I can maybe realize, wow, I'm in my neuroses right now. This is uncomfortable. This is hard. But I know it's what I just realize when I allow grace, into my heart, when the best thing I can often do is just extend that grace to another person, right? It's like, I know there's stuff going on in my life. There's got to be stuff going on in your life. If you're not showing up perfectly, you don't even need to tell me why. Like, there's enough reasons going on out in the world. Like, that's just enough. Just to know that, like, I just want to extend some grace to you. And I notice in that moment when I extend grace to someone else, when I like see them with unconditional positive regard, when I let go of all of the conspiracies, when I let go of all of the things that I think this person is trying to swindle with me with or whatever, or you know what I mean? Whatever hidden agenda I think they may have, when I just like offer some grace, it brings me back to a place of oneness. It brings me back to a place where I can actually offer that to myself. It brings me back to this deep breath of like, oh yeah, everything's okay. I'm tripping a little bit, but everything's okay. And I began to find and discover that wisdom and strength and that being tethered so deeply to the divine within me, that everything in that moment, when I offer grace to someone else and then I allow that same grace to be offered towards myself, it's a transformative thing. New Thought author Carolyn Mace, she says it this way. She says, grace is a power that comes in and transforms a moment into something better. Sometimes like we can find ourselves in a moment where it's like, ooh boy, like I've gotten myself into something. Do I continue to just go with this fight, or is there another way out, right? I think grace, in every breath we have the choice to begin again. Grace tells us like, hey, no matter what has come before, no matter how many times you've messed up, no matter what, like this no matter whatness, transformation is possible. Like you can make a new choice. You can have a new thought in this moment. And I think grace like gives us that. And I love how Nadia Bolz-Weber talks about grace. She says, grace is the cargo train that distributes into my life all the good and beautiful things that are unearnable. Forgiveness, mercy, endless second chances, the goodwill of those who could write me off, the sun rising each day, a perfect peach in summer, and love. All the good things that are unearnable. I think even if it just comes with one breath, even if we don't feel like we deserve another person's grace, or if we think that someone doesn't deserve ours, maybe that's the hardest part right now as we're navigating these divides. I think we can feel justified to not extend grace to someone else right now, especially if they're on the other side of whatever line we've drawn in the sand. But I know that like moving forward, we're going to have to find our way back to each other, y'all. We're going to have to find our way back to each other. And I know that this oneness, this belief in oneness, this recognition that there's a power within us that can steady us and guide us. And hey, guess what? That same power exists. That same presence exists in every single person, no matter what their political affiliation, no matter who they voted for, no matter what kind of upbringing made them make those decisions, no matter what values they may have. There's a presence within them that is deeply connected to your own, that your life and their life are intertwined, that we can't just eliminate half of our population and think everything's going to be better. That's not how we're going to go forward, I hope. That's how wars get started, y'all. But instead, there's something within us that can extend grace, that can offer it to each other, that so perhaps we can slowly start building bridges of understanding, of compassion. I know this is kind of like woo-woo stuff to say right now, but I feel like for me, it's what I need. Whether that's in personal relationships, in our families, whatever that is, I think we've learned enough from this conflict. And I think we're beginning to learn the ends of that. And if we keep going in the same direction, I think we know where it's going to lead. And so we have another choice right now. And it starts with finding this place within us that is indestructible and tethered to something deeper. So as we close today, I want to recognize that yesterday was the 20th anniversary of September 11th. I can remember exactly how it felt being glued to my TV screen on that day. I was a sophomore in college at the time. And that kind of terror I can still feel like in my bones. It was totally difficult to comprehend, and I was a religious studies major at the time, and it was completely baffling to be seeing how this was done in the name of a religion, of Islam, that I know to be one of peace, one of charity, one of kindness, one of love. And the people that I know who are deep, like who practice that religion, who are Muslim, who submit to that will of the divine, which is love, which is peace, which is kindness, which is charity, are like some of the best people, best human beings I know, right? And so I can remember how that felt and being so confused by that. And, I know today we still mourn those who were lost in that day and honor all those heroes, many of whom gave their lives in the effort to help another. And we also stand with, our Muslim brothers and sisters who have been impacted by those events, right? We stand for their, for their dignity, for their safety, and we speak out anytime we see acts of Islamophobia. I know that we stand for that here. I dated a girl that was living in New York City at the time of September 11th, and she described to me how right after the attacks, there's this interesting moment when everybody's heart was open. It was broken open because everyone was so brokenhearted by what had happened. And in that brokenheartedness that lasted just for a little while, there was this grace and this love and this connection that she had never experienced before in the city. And she also talked about how quickly that left, how quickly we politicized, how quickly we showed up in retaliation, how quickly we went to war, a war that we are now, 20 years later, in this very community, seeking to support the refugees that are now making their way here. And when I look at all of this, right, we can't begin to know all of the whys of how all of this took place, but we can be a place that is so deeply tethered. We can keep the faith and to know that there's always a place to access hope, that there is something in us that even when we want to give up on each other, there's something in us that simply won't let us. And we can give ourselves to that. We can give all of ourselves to that. And the same way we can allow this grace that is the experience of being human and alive, we can extend that to others and know that brings us so deeply back into this place that is tethered, that is guided, that is protected, and come to know that our spiritual journey is a deep part of that. So this is what we're up to, y'all. Times like these. We learn to live, we learn to give, we learn to love, and we're doing so in a way that maybe we haven't done before, but maybe we're being called to right now.